Welcome to the Deep Dives, where we plunge headfirst into the fascinating topics you've asked us to explore. Today, we're uncorking one of the most debated and, honestly, misunderstood elements in the world of wine: sulfites. For so many of us, they're either these invisible heroes protecting our favorite bottle, or maybe the silent villains behind those dreaded wine headaches.
It's a huge perception problem, isn't it? There's just so much noise, so many myths that keep going around about sulfites. It makes it really hard to know what's fact and what's, well, fiction.
Absolutely. And our mission with this deep dive is really to cut through all that noise. We've looked at the research, talked to winemakers, and tried to distill the science into something clear. Our goal is to equip you, the listener, with the real story, so you can make more informed choices about the wines you enjoy.
Yeah, we want to pull back the curtain on what sulfites truly are. We'll explore their surprisingly essential roles in making wine. We'll also debunk those persistent myths about them being the villains and peek into the delicate balancing act that winemakers have to perform. And finally, yeah, we'll give you some practical tips for navigating wine, especially if you think you might be sulfite sensitive.
Get ready for some genuine aha moments, I think, and maybe some surprising facts that could change how you think about wine forever. So let's start right at the beginning. Fundamentally, what are sulfites?
Okay, so at their core, sulfites are basically a group of compounds. They all come from sulfur dioxide, SO2. Think of SO2 like water. It can be in different states. In wine, SO2 shifts between a few different forms, but one form, molecular SO2, that's the real powerhouse. It's the active part, the potent bit that gives you those crucial antimicrobial and antioxidant properties we need to talk about. The other forms, like bisulfite and sulfite ions, they play a role, but they're, let's say, less effective.
And I've heard the wine's acidity, its pH level, that plays a big role in how effective that molecular SO2 is.
Oh, it's absolutely critical. The pH dictates how much of the total SO2 is actually in that active molecular form. So in more acidic wines, wines with a lower pH, a higher percentage of the SO2 is in that powerful state. And this is key for winemakers because it means they can actually use less total SO2 to get the same amount of protection. It's about efficiency, really.
Okay, now here's something that genuinely blew my mind when I first learned it. Sulfites aren't just something winemakers add. Your wine is actually making its own, naturally. How does that work?
It's true. It's pretty amazing, actually. The main yeast that turns grape juice into wine, that's Saccharomyces cerevisiae, well, it naturally generates small amounts of SO2. It's just a metabolic byproduct of fermentation. Part of its natural process, especially if the yeast is under a little bit of stress.
So wait, if the yeast naturally produces sulfites, does that mean the whole idea of a completely sulfite-free wine is just a myth? Even those bottles labeled no added sulfites will still have some.
Precisely. That natural production means sulfite-free. In an absolute sense, just doesn't exist. It's impossible. Every single wine, no matter what, will have at least a small amount of naturally occurring sulfites. It's baked into the fermentation process itself.
Wow, okay. That really does change your perspective. So if they're naturally there anyway, why do winemakers need to add more? What are the crucial points where they step in?
Right, so they add SO2 strategically at several key moments. Often it's used right at harvest or when the grapes first arrive at the winery. Think about those freshly picked grapes. SO2 acts like a shield, protecting them and the juice from oxidizing too early. And it also inhibits any undesirable wild yeasts or bacteria before the main fermentation even kicks on. It's like prepping the ground.
Okay, so it's like a preemptive strike, ensuring a clean, healthy fermentation.
Exactly. Then another common time for addition is after both the alcoholic and the secondary or malolactic fermentations are finished. At this stage, the young wine is quite vulnerable, so a controlled dose of SO2 helps stabilize it. It stops unwanted bacteria from causing spoilage, especially those lactic acid bacteria if you don't want that secondary fermentation in a particular style. And it acts as that ongoing shield against oxidation while the wine is aging during élevage.
And I'm guessing there's one more really critical dose just before it goes into the bottle.
Absolutely vital. That final adjustment just before bottling is crucial for the wine's entire lifespan. It ensures the wine is protected during shipping, during storage, and for however long it sits in that bottle. It preserves freshness, keeps the color vibrant, locks in those complex aromas, basically ensures the wine reaches your glass, tasting how the winemaker intended, even years later.
It really sounds like the decision to add SO2 and how much is far from arbitrary. What factors are winemakers constantly weighing up?
Oh, it's a complex calculation, a real nuanced dance, influenced by several key things. First, the quality of the grapes is huge. Healthy, perfect grapes. They need less SO2. They have natural resilience, often a lower pH too. Then the wine style. Whites and rosés, they're more susceptible to oxidation, so they generally need a bit more SO2 than reds. Reds have those natural antioxidants, tannins, pigments helping them out. And as we said, wine pH is critical. Lower pH needs less SO2 for the same protection. Winery hygiene makes a massive difference. Super clean cellars mean less microbial risk, so less SO2 needed. And finally, the winemaker's own philosophy and target market matter. Are they making a wine built to age for decades, or a minimal intervention natural wine? That guides the SO2 decisions too.
So this isn't some newfangled chemical additive. Sulfites, or at least sulfur, have been linked with wine for a very, very long time, haven't they?
Oh, ancient history. The connection is deep. Back in ancient Rome, they were already doing rudimentary things like burning sulfur candles inside amphora. They probably didn't know exactly why, but the SO2 released would have sanitized the vessels. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, especially in Germany, and the practice gets more deliberate. Winemakers started burning sulfur wicks inside empty oak barrels, again, to sanitize them and help preserve the wine.
Huh. So doing a sort of primitive version of what happens today, just without the full scientific understanding.
Exactly. Then a big step came in the 17th century with the Dutch. They were major global traders, right? They introduced something called the allumet hollandaise, basically a sulfur-coated stick, a Dutch matchstick. They'd light this inside barrels before shipping wine on long sea voyages. This was absolutely critical for stabilizing the wine, making sure it survived those rough journeys to markets far away.
That's amazing. It literally enabled the global wine trade as we know it.
Pretty much. But it wasn't until the 19th century that science really figured it out. With advances in chemistry and microbiology, researchers finally confirmed SO2's powerful antioxidant and antimicrobial properties. That scientific proof cemented its role. It went from being this traditional, almost instinctive practice to a precise, essential tool in modern winemaking.
Okay, so we got the science, the history. Let's talk about what this means for the wine in our glass right now. We've touched on it, but let's lean into this idea of sulfites as heroes. What are their absolutely essential quality-saving functions?
Right. The first and maybe the most important heroic role is as the ultimate antioxidant agent. Oxidation is, without a doubt, wine's #1 enemy. If you let it run wild, it just turns a vibrant, lovely wine into something flat, dull, lifeless.
And how does SO2 actually stop that? You mentioned an invisible shield earlier.
That's a good way to think about it. SO2 is really good at grabbing on to dissolved oxygen in the wine. It essentially sequesters, it traps it, takes it out of play before that oxygen can react with and damage delicate things like flavors and aromas. It also neutralizes some of the nasty byproducts of oxidation, like acetaldehyde, which gives those stale apple or nutty sherry-like notes.
And this directly affects the look and smell of the wine.
Massively. It's vital for keeping the color bright, preventing whites and roses from browning, for instance. But maybe even more importantly, it protects those delicate primary aromas, the fresh fruit, the floral notes that come straight from the grape. Without SO2, those aromas fade incredibly quickly. The wine loses its personality, develops those stale notes, sometimes even vinegary ones. SO2 allows the wine to evolve gracefully instead.
What's really interesting, too, is that sulfites aren't just fighting oxygen. They're also this clever, selective antimicrobial agent. What does that mean?
Exactly. Wine isn't sterile, it's a living thing, full of microbes. And it's vulnerable to lots of undesirable microorganisms that can cause serious off-flavors and spoilage. SO2 acts selectively. It inhibits these spoilage organisms, the bad guys, but crucially, at controlled doses, it doesn't harm the beneficial yeasts and bacteria that we actually want. It's like a targeted cleanup crew.
Okay, so who are these bad guys it fights off in the cellar?
Well, it tackles several key culprits. It stops wild yeasts that can produce weird flavors. It's a strong defense against acetic acid bacteria. Those are the ones that turn wine into vinegar. Nasty. It also manages unwanted lactic acid bacteria, which can cause things like mousy taints, too much buttery diacetyl flavor, or even sauerkraut notes. And a big one, it helps control Brettanomyces. That's the infamous Brett yeast, responsible for those aromas like Band-Aid, barnyard, horse sweat. Some people will find a touch interesting, but mostly it's considered a serious fault.
So it's basically ensuring the wine stays stable and lasts in the bottle, keeps it clean.
Precisely. Preventing re-fermentation in the bottle, stopping microbial spoilage. It ensures the wine's longevity and allows its desirable flavors and aromas to develop cleanly over time.
Are there any other heroic roles we should mention?
Well, it's not its main job, but SO2 does also help as a clarifying agent. It can help tiny solid particles clump together and fall out, leading to clearer, brighter-looking wine. Adds to the visual appeal. And, sort of indirectly, by stopping oxidation and unwanted microbes, SO2 helps preserve the wine's natural acidity and freshness. That crispness, that vivacity, SO2 helps keep it all in balance. It really is an unsung hero in many ways.
Okay. We've sung the praises of sulfites as heroes, but we have to address the other side. For many people, they are the villains, blamed for everything, especially those awful wine headaches. Let's tackle that perception head on.
Yeah, it's a really common belief, and it's so important to be clear here. A true sulfite allergy is extremely rare, and usually quite severe when it does happen. What's much more common is sensitivity, and that's different. It's not an immune system reaction like a true allergy.
And who tends to be most sensitive? Is there a specific group?
Yes. Primarily, it affects individuals who already have asthma. Estimates vary, but maybe 5% to 10% of people with asthma might experience sensitivity to sulfites. And for them, it usually shows up as respiratory symptoms.
Right. And the symptoms. Let's get to the big one first. The wine headache.
Yeah.
So many people point the finger straight at sulfites.
Ah, yes, the classic wine headache. This is probably the biggest myth we need to bust. While sulfites get blamed constantly, headaches after drinking wine are far more likely to be caused by other things. Think histamines, which are naturally present, especially in reds. Think tannins, also more prominent in reds. Residual sugar can play a role. And honestly, probably the biggest culprit is just the alcohol itself causing dehydration. Sulfites are way down the list of likely causes for most people's wine headaches.
So if it's not usually headaches, what are the typical symptoms for someone genuinely sensitive?
For those who are truly sensitive, particularly asthmatics, the most common and concerning symptoms are respiratory. Things like wheezing, difficulty breathing, maybe chest tightness. Other possible symptoms can include skin reactions, hives, itching, redness, or digestive issues, nausea, stomach pain, that sort of thing. Dizziness, maybe some swelling can happen too. But it's really important to stress, again, the overall number of people with actual sulfite sensitivity in the general population is very low, less than 1%.
Okay, so let's officially debunk a couple of the most popular myths right here. Myth number 1. Red wine causes headaches because it has more sulfites.
Right, this one is everywhere, and it's actually backward. Red wines generally contain less added sulfites than white wines or rosés. Why? Because, as we mentioned, reds have natural antioxidant protection from their tannins and color pigments. Whites don't have as much of that buffer, so logically, if sulfites were the main headache trigger, you'd expect white wines to be worse offenders. The reality is, red wine headaches are much more likely due to those other compounds. Histamines, maybe tyramines, tannins, higher alcohol levels sometimes, or just plain dehydration.
Got it. Okay, myth number 2. Sulfites cause hangovers. Is there any link between sulfites and feeling rough the next morning?
Nope. There's really no solid scientific evidence backing that up at all. Hangovers are primarily caused by the alcohol itself and its toxic breakdown product, acetaldehyde. Dehydration is a massive factor. And something called congeners, other compounds produced during fermentation, can contribute too. But sulfites, they're not the reason you have a hangover. Blame the alcohol.
Okay, this next bit is a real eye-opener. It might totally shift your perspective on sulfites in wine. Let's compare the sulfite levels in wine to other common foods we eat, probably without even thinking about it. What stands out here?
This is where the whole sulfites in wine are uniquely bad idea really falls apart. It's actually shocking when you compare. Many foods we eat every day contain way higher levels of sulfites than most wines. Take dried fruits, for instance. Things like dried apricots, raisins. They can contain anywhere from 1,000 up to 3,000 milligrams per kilogram of sulfites. They're added to preserve color and stop mold growth.
Wait, 3,000? That's orders of magnitude more than wine.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. Processed meats like sausages and burger patties, they can have up to 450 milligrams used for freshness, color, stopping bacteria. You'll also find sulfites in things like fruit juice concentrates, some vinegars, pickles, even frozen French fries. So this comparison really helps put the levels in wine into perspective. Wine often gets singled out, but sulfites are actually pretty common in our diet, often at much higher concentrations.
It's fascinating, then, how strictly sulfite levels are regulated in wine, despite being lower than in many other foods. It's not just a free-for-all for winemakers.
Absolutely not. The regulations are quite specific, though they do vary around the world. The goal is always consumer safety, preventing excessive use. In the European Union, for example, the limits are pretty detailed based on wine type. Standard reds are capped at 150 milligrams per liter, whites and roses at 200 milligl. Sweet wines, because they're vulnerable to re-fermenting, can have higher limits, sometimes up to 400 milligl.
And how does the U.S. compare? Is it different there?
Yes, the United States takes a different approach. They have a single, generally higher limit of 350 milligl for all types of wine. Brazil, being part of Mercosul, tends to follow guidelines more similar to the EU's. The key point isn't really memorizing the numbers, but understanding that there are strict legal limits everywhere, ensuring safety, even if the exact ceilings differ.
And that contains sulfites warning on the label that's become pretty standard globally now, hasn't it? It's about transparency.
It really is. That became mandatory in the EU back in 2005, and yeah, it's pretty much global practice now. It gets triggered if the wine has more than 10 milligrams per liter of total SO2, which is a very low threshold, remember. Even naturally occurring sulfites can easily exceed that level. So the main purpose is consumer protection. It allows people who know they are sensitive to easily identify wines they need to avoid.
Let's dig a bit deeper now into those no added sulfites wines and the whole winemaking perspective.
Yeah.
First, can you clarify the technical difference between total and free sulfites? Sounds like one is doing more work than the other.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. Total sulfite is just what it sounds like, the overall amount of SO2 in the wine. That includes the SO2 that's bound to other molecules like sugars or aldehydes. But then there's free sulfite. That's the portion that is unbound and chemically active. This free SO2 is the part that's actually doing the heavy lifting, providing the real-time antioxidant and antimicrobial protection. Winemakers monitor this free sulfite level very carefully. That's the number they're really focused on managing.
And you mentioned earlier that if the free sulfite level is too high, you might actually be able to smell it.
Yes, exactly. If the free SO2 level is excessive, sometimes you can detect a distinct smell, often described as like a burnt match or a struck match. It's usually a sign that maybe a bit too much was added or the balance isn't quite right.
Okay, so back to those no added sulfites wines. What does that label really tell us, and what are the huge challenges for the winemakers trying to pull this off?
Right, so no added sulfites means just that. The winemaker didn't intentionally add any SO2 during the process, but, like we established, thanks to the yeast, all wine has some naturally produced sulfites, so it's never truly sulfite-free. The biggest challenge for producers making these wines is their extreme vulnerability. Without that protective SO2 shield, the wine is drastically more open to attack. Oxidation happens much faster, leading to those flat, bruised apple or even vinegary notes in browning, and microbial spoilage from things like Brett or acetic bacteria becomes a much higher risk.
So they're inherently much less stable wines then. They need more careful handling.
Precisely. These wines generally have a significantly shorter shelf life. They're very sensitive to temperature fluctuations, to light exposure, and once you open a bottle, they can often deteriorate remarkably quickly, sometimes within hours. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some absolutely excellent no-added sulfite wines out there, but making them successfully requires incredible skill and perfect conditions. You need exceptionally healthy grapes, unbelievably strict hygiene in the winery, precise temperature control. Everything has to be perfect. They can be incredibly expressive in cure, really showing their terroir. But yeah, they demand careful handling, both from the winemaker and the consumer.
It really sounds like this constant dilemma for winemakers. How do you protect the wine versus this growing desire, both from consumers and maybe philosophically, for minimal intervention?
It's a perpetual balancing act, absolutely. They're constantly weighing the need to protect the wine, ensure it's stable and enjoyable against that drive for minimal intervention, for letting the grape speak for itself. And all those factors we discussed, grape quality, the style of wine, its pH, the cellar hygiene, they all feed directly into this decision. Ultimately, the goal for most conscientious winemakers today is to use the least amount of SO2 necessary to achieve the desired quality, stability, and longevity for that specific wine.
So how are they achieving that? What clever tools and techniques are helping winemakers minimize SO2 use without sacrificing the wine?
They're using a whole toolbox of advanced practices now. Impeccable winery hygiene is probably number one. Just keeping everything incredibly clean dramatically reduces the microbial load, meaning less need for SO2's antimicrobial action. Precise temperature control is huge too. Keeping things cool slows down chemical reactions like oxidation and inhibits the growth of spoilage microbes. Starting with healthy, ripe grapes is fundamental. They're just naturally more resilient and require less help. Winemakers are also getting much better at oxygen management, using inert gases like nitrogen or argon to blanket the wine during transfers, careful handling to avoid splashing. Anything to minimize air contact helps reduce the need for SO2's antioxidant power.
And I've heard about aging wines, Shirley, on the dead yeast cells. How does that fit into reducing sulfites?
Yeah, aging sur lie is a great technique. The dead yeast cells, the lees, actually release compounds that consume oxygen and have antioxidant properties themselves. So aging on lees provides a kind of natural protection, reducing the need for added SO2, plus it adds texture and complexity, which is a bonus. And finally, yeast selection is becoming more sophisticated. Winemakers can choose specific yeast strains that are known to produce less natural SO2 during fermentation, or strains that are inherently more robust against oxidation. Little adjustments like these all add up.
This whole conversation ties really nicely into the natural wine movement, which seems to have very specific, sometimes quite radical, philosophy about sulfites.
Indeed, it does. The natural wine movement, at its core, champions minimal intervention in both the vineyard and the winery. And when it comes to sulfites, that often means aiming for very low levels or even zero added sulfites. That's the most sort of extreme end of the natural wine spectrum. Others within the movement might use a tiny amount, often just a very small dose right before bottling, almost like a minimal safety net to prevent disaster during transport and storage.
So, given all those risks we talked about oxidation, spoilage, what specific practices do these producers rely on if they're using minimal or absolutely zero added sulfites?
They have to rely heavily on everything else being perfect. That means truly exceptional great quality is non-negotiable. Extreme, almost fanatical cellar hygiene is critical. They need a deep, intuitive understanding of their specific vineyard site, their terroir, and the conditions of that particular vintage. And meticulous temperature and humidity control throughout the entire process. Fermentation, aging, bottling, storage becomes even more vital when you remove the safety net of SO2.
And for us, the drinkers, what can we expect sensorially when we open a natural wine made with minimal or no added sulfites? What are some common characteristics we might find?
Well, you might encounter more noticeable oxidative notes. Aromas like bruised apple, nuts, maybe even a hint of sherry character. This comes from that reduced protection against oxygen. Whether you see that as added character or a flaw often depends on your personal taste. You might also find more rustic or funky notes, sometimes earthy, sometimes barnyardy, maybe that Band-Aid smell associated with the Brettanomyces. Again, some people embrace these as authentic terroir expressions, while others consider them faults. It can be quite polarizing.
And what about aging potential? Should we be cellaring these wines?
Generally speaking, these wines tend to have lower longevity. They're often best enjoyed relatively young, while they still have that primary vibrancy. But the biggest potential upside for proponents is the authentic terroir expression. The argument is that without the muting effect of SO2, the pure, unadulterated voice of the grape, the soil, the climate can really shine through more clearly.
It sounds like the wider wine industry, not just the natural fringe, is actually moving in this direction anyway towards lower sulfite additions overall.
I think that's definitely true. There's a clear trend across the industry towards more mindful, reduced use of sulfites. It's driven partly by consumer demand for wines perceived as cleaner or more natural, but it's also driven by genuine advancements in viticulture and winemaking techniques, all those things we just discussed, like better hygiene, oxygen management, understanding lees aging. They allow winemakers to use less SO2 without compromising quality. It's an exciting evolution.
Okay, so armed with all this fantastic information, what does it mean for you listening right now as a conscious consumer? How can you actually identify wines that are likely to have lower sulfite content when you're browsing the shelves?
Okay, practical tips. First, the most direct way. Look for labels that explicitly state no added sulfites or no added sulfites. Just remember our caveat that doesn't mean zero sulfites, just none added intentionally. Second, look for certifications like organic or biodynamic. These certifications often have stricter, lower legal limits for total SO2 compared to conventional wines. For example, in the EU, certified organic red wines have a lower cap than standard reds, so that certification can be a useful indicator.
All right, so certifications are a good clue. What else should people look out for?
Definitely explore wines from producers who identify as natural winemakers. They're usually very transparent about their practices, including sulfite use, often right on their website or tech sheets. Also, consider reaching for younger red wines. As we've said, they typically require less SO2 than whites or sweet wines due to those natural tannins providing some protection. And here's that interesting paradox again. Often, it's the really high-quality, meticulous producers who can get away with using less SO2. Why? Because they start with perfect grapes, have spotless cellars, and use incredibly precise winemaking. So sometimes paying a bit more can actually mean less intervention, including less SO2.
That's a great point. Quality often equals less need for additions. Okay, so for those people who do suspect they might be genuinely sulfite sensitive, What are the most important tips for navigating wine choices?
Number one is still read labels carefully. Prioritize those explicitly labeled no added sulfites if you know you react. Number two, experiment cautiously. Try different styles. Maybe start with those young, lower sulfite reds and see how you personally react. Everyone is different. Number three, and this is crucial for everyone drinking wine, sensitive or not, stay hydrated. Drink plenty of water before, during, and after drinking wine. Dehydration is a massive contributor to feeling unwell, and it often gets mistaken for a sulfite reaction.
And I assume moderation is always good advice too.
Always. Practice moderation. Simple as that. Less alcohol means less potential for any kind of negative reaction, whether it's sulfite related or not. And finally, a really useful tip. Keep a reaction diary. Make notes. Which specific wines seemed to cause an issue? Did you eat anything else high in sulfites that day, like dried fruit or sausages? Tracking this can help you identify your specific triggers rather than relying on general myths.
So it really boils down to understanding your own body and its unique reactions rather than just jumping to blame sulfites for everything.
Precisely. Your reaction to wine is incredibly individual. Don't just accept the common myths as fact for you. Remember, things like headaches, flushing, feeling unwell, they are far more likely to be caused by other components in the wine, like histamines, tannins, maybe tyramines, or simply the effects of the alcohol and dehydration.
One last point, the role of wine storage after we buy it. How does that factor into our experience, potentially with sulfites?
That's a really good point. Proper storage keeping wine at a consistent cool temperature, away from light and vibration, with decent humidity if it's under cork, helps preserve the wine naturally. It maintains the wine's integrity. If a wine is stored well, it stays stable, and any SO2 present remains effective without breaking down into potentially less pleasant compounds. So good storage helps the wine show its best, potentially making any sulfite presence less noticeable or problematic. It's one area where our actions as consumers can directly impact the wine's quality and how we perceive it.
Okay, let's try and wrap this all up. We have really gone deep into the complex world of sulfites in wine today. And I think what's become clear is that they are fundamentally a vital tool, a multifaceted tool in winemaking, often acting as true heroes for preserving quality and ensuring longevity.
Absolutely. But we also have to acknowledge that villain reputation, it comes from somewhere, partly from real, though often misunderstood, sensitivities, and partly from those really persistent myths that we've hopefully helped to clear up a bit today. It's definitely not a simple black and white issue.
And looking ahead, it's genuinely exciting to see the direction the wine world is moving in. That trend towards more mindful, reduced use of sulfites seems clear, driven by innovation, by better techniques, and definitely by consumers wanting cleaner, more authentic expressions of wine.
It really is an exciting time, both for winemakers exploring these techniques and for us drinkers getting to taste the results.
So what does all this mean for you? Ultimately, it means that becoming an informed consumer, understanding the facts behind the label, empowers you. It empowers you to enjoy wine with more confidence, maybe more appreciation. Understanding the science, being able to dismiss the myths, and crucially paying attention to your own body's reactions that can really transform your wine journey. The complexity of wine, including this whole sulfite story, is part of its magic, isn't it? It's a testament to centuries of art, science, and that constant pursuit of liquid beauty. So our final thought for you. With this fresh perspective, what new wine, perhaps one you might have avoided before, will you be tempted to explore next?